Hello, dear friends. I'm recording from New York City, from Riverdale. It's here for my niece's wedding. And I'd like to speak about parshat Korach. Some ideas that I said also at the weekend before the wedding, what we call the Shabbat Chatan. And it's about Korach. Korach is the one who challenges Moses' authority. And like very often happens in life, Korach is a relative. He's a cousin. Moshe is the son of Amram. And Korach is the son of Yitzhar. Amram and Yitzhar were brothers. Amram was the oldest. Yitzhar was number two. And Korach feels that he was cheated. After all, why was it that Moses let his brother Aaron be the high priest? So Moses becomes a leader and his brother becomes a high priest. What is this, nepotism? And he accuses Moshe of nepotism, according to the Midrash Tanchuma. He also accuses Moses of arrogance. Madua titnasu al kal Hashem. Why are you holding yourselves above the rest of the people? The man with the Torah says about that he was the humblest man of all men is accused of arrogance. How could that possibly be? Of course, arrogance and humility are personal traits. A person can be humble, but if their job requires them to take a command position, they won't act humble outwardly, but they actually are. That's Moses. Moses knows how to lead. King David also had a certain amount of humility, maybe not the same as Moses, but we know he said, Vanochi tolad v'lo ish. He says, I am just a worm and not a person. But Moses was the most humble, but that didn't interfere with his leadership position. He understood what he had to do. And they accused him of all these terrible things, Eshetish, and as if because the Tanchuma, they try to accuse him also of sexual prohibitions, etc. Whatever you want. That's what people do when they want to smear the leadership. Let's just say a lot of things about him, and hopefully people will follow, because there are a lot of jealous people. So was Korach and the Levim, other people from the tribe of Levi who also wanted leadership. And you also had the 250 people who were the heads of the community, which seemed to be the Bechorim, according to one interpretation. The firstborn, who also had the positions taken away. And also one Ben Pelet and Datan Vavram from Reuven, from the tribe of Reuven, also the firstborn of Jacob. So a lot of people who felt that they deserve leadership positions and not Moses. And Moses says, Rav lachem b'nei Levi, O Levites, isn't it enough that God has given you that you now have to become also Kohanim? And he says, it's not against me that these arguments are, it's against God, because these were not my decisions. But this is what Korach does. And he creates this feeling of jealousy, meaning that he's jealous, really, and trying to divide the people. Kol ha'ida kulam kadoshim. All the people are holy. How come you're above them? Democracy, everybody should be the same. Nobody should be the leader. And if nobody or anybody, of course, Korach wants to be the leader. He doesn't want anybody else. So he wants exactly what he's claiming is no good. But you never reveal that at the beginning. You get the people behind you by saying, oh, equality, etc. You knock off the leader, then you become a totalitarian society. Then people don't even realize what hit them until it happens. It's the old trick, and it happens over and over again. So Korach says, Madua titnasu al kal Hashem, why are you making yourselves above the others? And after all, kol ha'ida kulam kadoshim, all of the community of Israel are holy. Everyone is holy. So why are you better than anybody else? Rabbi Chaim Drukman of blessed memory once said that if Korach would have said, all of the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael, is holy as a collective unit, that would have been correct. The people of Israel, yes, as a collective unit, they are holy. They're holy people. Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. God says to the Israelites, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy people. So that's correct. But what he said was, Kol Haida Kulam, the whole assembly, every one of them is holy. Now, wait a sec. Every one of them? On the individual basis? It depends. How human beings decide to actualize themselves and develop themselves, that's how much effort they put into it. There are levels of actualization. In Hebrew, we have 4 famous levels, what we call the yashar, somebody who has a certain honesty about them, a certain morality about them, a yashar. Then you have what's called a tzaddik, somebody who not only has morality, but brings it to fruition, follows the law. It's called a tzaddik. Then you have a chassid, somebody who does more than the letter of the law. And then you have somebody who's kadosh, somebody who's holy, who tries to do even more than that, and in many things abstains from things that they're allowed to do, that they don't look for naval b'rshut Torah, they don't try to abuse the laws of the Torah, even when they're allowed to. So we have that in the tefillah on Shabbat morning, Bifi yesharim titalal, u'divrei tzadikim titbarach, v'lashon chasidim titromam, v'kerev kedoshim titkadash. So you have 4 levels: yashar, tzaddik, chasid, ne'eman, somebody who's innately honest, somebody who is a righteous person because they can also follow the law, somebody who does more than the letter of the law, and somebody who is kadosh, who is holy. And to say to everybody hit the highest level, as we say in Hebrew, halavai, may it be so. But normally, people are on different levels. That's just the way of human beings, the way of the world. So what's this? Every individual is on the level of sanctity and holiness. That's probably not a realistic way of looking at things. But there's something else about Korach. And Rashi, by the way, on this parsha, is one of the few places where he refers the reader to the Tanchuma and says that the Tanchuma has a lot of interesting stuff on this week's parsha. Tanchuma brings a story, and the story goes that Korach came to Moses to prove that Moses was wrong in his leadership. Said, Moses, you know that mitzvah called mezuzah you said we're supposed to put on our door? Well, on our doorpost? What would happen if you had a room that was full of scrolls of the Torah, Sifrei Torah? Because after all, in the mezuzah, we write 2 paragraphs. One is from Deuteronomy 6, another one is from Deuteronomy 11. So if I had a whole room which was full of the books of the scrolls of the Torah, would I still have to put a mezuzah on the doorpost? Moses says, of course. Korach says, you see, that's illogical. After all, the Sefer Torah already has what the mezuzah says. Why would I need a mezuzah on the doorpost? That's a proof that you're a liar. That is part 1. And then question number 2. Question number 2. Let's say a person had a talit, what we call the prayer shawl. You have a talit kulat chelet. It's made completely of the blue thread. In antiquity, on the fringes of the talit, we put the blue thread. Some people do it today too. So let's say the whole talit, which means the whole garment, is made out of the blue thread. You still have to have a blue thread on the fringes that you put, what's called the tzitzit, on the talit. Well, it says, of course. It says, you see, it's illogical. So that means that you are a liar. And even what you said, that God chose you and that Aaron is supposed to be the high priest, which is concerned him more. So, because that's what he wanted, that shows that this is a mistake and everything you're doing is wrong. So that's the first mistake of Korach, of course, was his arrogance. Like it says in Pirkei Avot, that machloket shelo l'shem shamayim ein sofa litkayem. When you have an argument which is not for the sake of heaven, it will not continue. Only when it's for the sake of heaven. And the Mishnah says, what is a machloket for the sake of heaven? That's like the machloket between Hillel and Shammai, who both of them had good intentions, even if they had differences of opinion in Jewish law. And what is a machloket, a controversy, not for the sake of heaven? That is the controversy of Korach and his assembly. Now, of course, everybody says, what do you mean Korach and his assembly? It was a controversy between Korach and Moses. And no, a controversy based on arrogance is between you and your assembly, because everybody wants to be at the top, and eventually there's going to be infighting, whether it's successful or unsuccessful. So what is this arguments of Korach according to the Tanchuma? If you have a house full of books, do you still need the mezuzah on the door, meaning a house full of scrolls of the law, of the Torah? Korach is trying to look at the world from a point of view of human logic. Now, human logic can understand a lot of things. God gave us an intellect to understand, perceive the world. But when it comes to metaphysical issues, especially issues where God is appointing somebody, it's not a question exactly of human logic. Sometimes there are other things involved here. And to try to use human logic as the only measuring stick of everything can ultimately lead a person astray in these particular matters, especially because human beings have the possibility of rationalizing things, and we have emotions and arrogance and self-interest. So sometimes we can use our minds to lead ourselves astray. As we know, there are lots of things you can rationalize. The Talmud says you can bring 49 logical arguments to prove that eating insects is kosher. However, the problem is it's not, because the Torah says it's not. So sometimes you can use logic for the wrong things. And when it comes to issues of faith, logic is not necessarily the main measuring stick. There are other things within our psyche. There is intuition, and a lot of things that we do in life are not necessarily based on the idea of logical skills. Faith is something which is, I call it a skill, which a person has to develop. In Hebrew, emunah is the word for faith, and it has the same root as the word oman, which is an artist, or umanut, which is artistic work. Maaseh de uman. So it's an art that has to be developed. It's a skill. An artisan can also be a skill in this sense. It's a skill, and umanut is also a skill. So it's a skill that has to be developed. It's something within the human psyche. In the Kabbalistic lore, in the Kabbalistic tradition, maybe I should say, intellect is not the highest level within the human being. In the Western tradition, based on Greek philosophy, a human being is in Latin, the Homo sapiens, the thinking being. And the logos is the highest level in nature. You have minerals, and you have plants, you have animals, and you have man. And man is the speaking man, the logos with the intellect. And this tradition has continued all through the ages, and actually only, I would say, be opposed or argued, let's say, in the 20th century. In the 20th century, you have William James, already at the end of the 19th century, wondered if a human being is actually based only on logic. He actually argued the opposite. First, we believe things, and then we look for reasons why we believe them. So he actually thought that logic is used, or the intellect, to prove things that we already think are correct. I guess you might say that's sort of a low way of looking at the human being, but that's what he thought. And there are others who wondered if human beings are actually logical beings, or we just use logic every now and then. In a book called Gut Feelings, Gert Gergerenzer, a German psychologist, tells the story of how Ben Franklin had a nephew who was wondering who to marry. And let's call them Susan and Jane. Says, Uncle Ben, who should I marry, Susan or Jane? Not sure. So Uncle Ben says, well, make a list of all the pros and cons. What's good about Jane? What's bad about her? What's good about Susan? What's bad about her? Who has the most pros and the least cons? That's the one to marry. That's the logical conclusion. Okay, so the nephew makes the list, the pros and the cons. And he sees that Jane has the better list, more pros, less cons. So he marries Susan. Why does he marry Susan? Because when he realized that the logical conclusion was Jane, he realized that he wanted Susan more than Jane. So, questions of gut feelings. A lot of things in life, we actually decide on gut feelings. We do use our intellect. So one of them, of course, is the spouse we are going to take in our lives. The people we want to have as friends, it's also gut feelings. To be comfortable with them, to be on the same wavelength, sometimes we say, to have the same chemistry, we sometimes say. Even political parties, a lot of it is gut feelings. And a lot of things in life are based on this. On do these things seem to make sense? The Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi, on Genesis, says, why is it that Pharaoh agreed with Joseph in his interpretation of his dream of the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows? After all, there were a lot of people interpreting the dreams, just that Pharaoh didn't think that was good interpretation. So why with Joseph did he think it was such great interpretation? Rashbam says, Nikarim divrei emet. It's always apparent when something is true. Truth is apparent, and you can perceive it as such. There's a sort of feeling when something is right. Interesting idea. So the question is then, and well, what I talked about at the Shabbat of the wedding, and I think is also important for this idea, is that at the beginning of a marriage, or right before the marriage, while the man and the woman are getting to know each other, then they make a commitment. This commitment to get married is a commitment based on faith. You use your intellect to try to perceive the other person, but you don't really know what's going to be the next day. And at that point, you take a leap of faith to get married. That leap of faith is also mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 2 says to the Jewish people, Zacharti la chesed ne'urayich, I remember the kindness of your youth, ahavat klulotayich, the love when you were betrothed, before you got married. And what was it? Lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz lo zerua, when you, the people of Israel, followed me in the desert for 40 years, in a barren wasteland. It was an act of love, an act of commitment, and an act of faith. Where the people of Israel followed God through the desert for 40 years for that promised land, and where the wedding would take place, where the temple and God would be in the tabernacle and be together with the people. Followed them in the midbar for 40 years, And during those 40 years, that's that act of faith. It's like the chatan and the kala, the bride and the groom, taking that act of faith. And it also says in the prophets, we have the minhag to recite this every morning when we wrap the tefillin around our middle finger. And I shall betroth you forever. Betrothed is the first part of the wedding ceremony before it's finished. It's at the beginning, Erusin. I shall betroth you forever. Ve'erastichli b'tzedek u'v'mishpat u'v'chesed u'v'rachamim, and I will betroth you with mercy and with judgment and with kindness. Ve'erastichli be'emunah, I shall betroth you in faith, and you shall know that I am God. So there's a faith relationship at that beginning when the partners decide to put their lives together. So faith is something we develop. It's also a sense, a perception within ourselves. Now, I want to tell another story. I have a friend, Dr. Rafi Zarim from London, who a week and a half ago, it was a Sunday, he came to Jerusalem to launch his new book, Questioning Faith. And he was interviewed by the rabbi of the synagogue. And he told a story. He said he went down to Gaza they have these NGOs that offer the soldiers when they're on their break meals, because sometimes army food can be pretty rotten. And he said he went to participate one time to talk to people. And he came to people and he wanted to interview them for his book. And he said to them, "What is belief in God for you?" And the first one said, "Well, for me, God is the basis of all life." Second one said, "Well, for me, God protects me." Third one said, "Well, I'll tell you a story, what I feel is an act of faith." So he says, "What's the story?" He says, "The story was, I was in my truck, and I was with my unit, and we had to deliver some equipment from one place to another. So I get in the truck, and they loaded up the equipment. I came to the second unit, dropped off the stuff. They left, and I'm about to head back, and I realize my unit also left, and they left me behind. Okay, so I try to turn on the truck. It doesn't turn on. It starts to stall. I look again, try to turn on the truck, doesn't go. I'm starting to get a little nervous. Again, I try to turn on the truck. It doesn't go. Wait a little bit, open up the front, check the engine. Everything looks okay. I don't exactly understand the problem. Come back in again, try again. Now I'm noticing that there's some faces popping out from buildings nearby, looking at me, and I realize it's the enemy. I got to get out of here. But I'm stuck. The truck won't start. At that moment, I said, God, I'm stuck. This might be the end. And I really need help because there's so many things I want to do in my life and so many good things I want to do in my life. But I need your help now because if not, I don't think I'll even get through the next few minutes. So if you could, let me get through these minutes and get forward so I can do those good things I want to do in my life. I tried again. The truck started, hit the gas, got out of there as quickly as I could, and finally found my unit. That miracle really moved me. So then Dr. Zarim says to him, well, maybe it wasn't a miracle. Maybe it was just a coincidence. At that moment, it turned on, right? He says, I don't think so. And then Dr. Zarim says, what's your name? He says, my name is Rafi. And then he turns to Dr. Zarim and says, what's your name? He says, my name's also Rafi, actually. So then the soldier says, well, the fact that we're both Rafi, that is a coincidence. But the fact that my truck started, that was a miracle. I know it. There's certain things that you sense with your being and not just with your intellect. This is not belittling intellect. Intellect is the way we understand life. But when we try to perceive things beyond life, beyond our boundary, on that, let's say, frontier which separates the natural world and what we call the metaphysical, that's where we need a little help. where we shouldn't embrace things which are against the intellect, but things that are above the intellect, we need a little bit of intuition sometimes in our lives. Korach was trying to judge everything by the intellect. And he was using the intellect to belittle Moses. But Moses was appointed by God. These decisions were not his own. So it's easy to belittle it by the intellect when nothing here was about the intellect in the first place. And sometimes people can use false arguments in such ways, but they're parts of life which transcend. And these are things that we struggle with, because faith is a struggle all our lives. We have to develop it and grow with it and live with it. And every day we will have new understandings what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human, and what it means to be part of a world in where we have an interface between human beings and God. Shalom, shalom.